Namaskar viewers, hello and welcome to Sansad TV. I am Tina Jha, you're watching Perspective. The financial viability of many countries is threatened by unsustainable debt levels, said Prime Minister Narendra Modi on Friday, calling upon the G20 to focus on the world's most vulnerable citizens. Addressing the G20 finance ministers and central governors at the first ministerial meeting under India's G20 presidency, the Prime Minister enumerated the recent challenges to the global economy, the after effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, rising geopolitical tensions, disruptions in global supply chains, food and energy security, unsustainable debt levels, and also the erosion of trust in international financial institutions due to their inability to reform quickly. So amid these challenges, the Prime Minister pointed out that it is now imperative for the group of 20 nations to provide stability, confidence, and growth to the global economy. It's not an easy task, the Prime Minister acknowledged, but he did express hope that G20 will draw inspiration from the vibrancy of the Indian economy. In Perspective today, we will discuss some of these important aspects that the Prime Minister spoke about at the first G20 ministerial under its presidency and how the G20 can resolutely address challenges like threats to financial stability and debt distress that confront the global economy. So for this, three distinguished panelists are joining us on the program. Delighted to have with us in the studio Dr. Subhash Chandra Pandey, former Special Secretary and Financial Advisor, Ministry of Commerce and Industry, Government of India. Dr. Pandey, thank you for your time and welcome to the program. Joining us virtually are two special guests again, Professor Charan Singh, CEO, eGrow Foundation, Mr. A.K. Bhattacharya, Editorial Director, Business Standard. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us on the program today. But before we begin with the discussion, let's listen into what the Prime Minister said, some of the significant aspects that he spoke about at the G20 finance ministers meeting. Let's listen in.
Many countries, especially developing economies, are still coping with its after effects. We are also witnessing rising geopolitical tensions in different parts of the world. There are disruptions in global supply chains. Many societies are suffering due to rising prices, and food and energy security have become major concerns across the world. Even the financial viability of many countries is threatened by unsustainable debt levels.
The most pressing global challenges. The G20 can transform lives around the globe by leveraging the complementary strengths of its members while respecting country needs and circumstances. It can be a global prime mover and the incubator of new ideas, a force for collective good, and a forum to listen to the voices of the global South. Supporting the countries most in need and reflecting the concerns and aspirations of developing countries will be central to our efforts. We will work closely with the Troika, the G20 membership, international organizations, and guest countries to carry forward the exemplary work of G20 presidencies before us.
Okay, so you just heard the Prime Minister and also the Finance Minister speak about the importance of G20. India is holding the presidency this year, and the kind of issues that we want to discuss, the kind of interest that we want to bring forth at this global platform. Dr. Pandey, allow me to begin the program today with you. You know, the biggest takeaway from what the Prime Minister spoke about, and he touched upon various aspects, right from the challenges to what the way forward can be. And he says it is imperative for the G20 today, given the situation we are in. He listed out these challenges that the global economy is facing. And he says, as custodians of the global economy, the G20 now must work towards bringing back the stability, the confidence, and the growth required for the global economy. As India holds the presidency and as the chairman of the G20 this year, What do you think is the roadmap that India provides? So when the Prime Minister from this platform announces and gives that confidence, sends out that optimist message, do you think we have a roadmap and then we talk about such aspects?
Indeed, Tinaji, let me put what Honorable Prime Minister said in perspective and some in the light of certain macro facts about world economy and indebtedness. Indeed, India has assumed G20 presidency at a time which experts are calling world is facing polycrisis, a series of crises which are interconnected. Of a longer duration have been the crisis about a large number of developing countries still struggling to meet sustainable development goals, eradicating extreme poverty, hunger, malnutrition, health issues. But more recently, after the post-pandemic revival, when the supply lines have been disrupted because of the pandemic, and then the food and energy prices and supplies have been adversely affected because of the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict. So this has created added certain new crises which have further aggravated the existing crisis. One is when the inflation has risen already over the period of last 40-50 years, the world has accumulated huge amount of debt. The global world debt, as per IMF statistics, is about 247 trillion, which is almost about 247% of GDP is there. And GDP is about 96 trillion, so 247% is. According to other independent estimates, taking certain other indebtedness, contingent liabilities, it goes as much as high as 300 trillion. So compared to that, when the world is so indebted, you are exposed to the risk of interest rate hike. And in view of the food and energy price increases, central banks have started raising interest rates to fight inflation. And in their fight to inflation, the interest costs have gone up for public debt and for commercial, and it is creating sickness and instability in a large number. So we have seen in recent, India of course has done better because it has been pursued more prudent macroeconomic policies. It has not fallen prey to fiscal stimulus and related populism, and relatively pursued infrastructure-related led development policy. But many other, in our immediate neighborhood, we are seeing smaller countries, they are facing serious external crisis. For a few $1 billion, they are struggling. And all that has happened because the inflation and interest rates have exacerbated. And in compared to what the Honorable Prime Minister said, the multilateral financial institutions, they need to do better and they need to democratize. If we put the numbers in perspective.
Certainly. Dr. Pandey, we'll come to that. That's a wider discussion, and we'll come to how these reforms have been long overdue and what really is the need of the hour. But let me go to Mr. Bhattacharya and understand from him also the problem of unsustainable debt that the Prime Minister flagged, Mr. Bhattacharya. The fact that this was very, very timely, the fact that this has impacted several countries, and the Prime Minister actually says he uses the G20 platform to highlight how it is threatening the financial viability of many countries. Now, as a group of countries which involve, which comprise of both developed and developing countries, also some of the emerging economies, what can the G20 do to address the problem of unsustainable debt?
You have touched upon the most important issue here. In terms of the debt sustainability issue, the Prime Minister's address itself provides a clear pointer to what needs to be done. His clear, a kind of a clarion call that he gave was to strengthen the multilateral developmental banking institutions. And it is such a timely call that at a time when the organizations like the World Bank have need to reinvent and rededicate themselves the task of development financing and creating a new financial architecture by which the debt issues of the member countries are tackled. And as you would know that just about, I think this morning, the newspapers have carried the news about an Indian American being named by the US as the next the World Bank president. So I think the Prime Minister's the prescription that the multilateral development institutions need to be reimagined, need to be strengthened to address not just the debt issues. He touched upon another critical issue, which is debt and climate change issues. So therefore, you are, as a G20 president, India is advocating the need for strengthening the World Bank as well as to make sure that that multilateral institutions addresses two of the key concerns of the economy, the world economy, which is climate change and debt vulnerabilities. Along with that, he has offered his Indian solution, and that is coming from the digital technology. And he talks about how the digital technology and the way India has shown the path by ensuring that the financial payments will benefit hugely for the common man for transaction purposes using of technology. And as it happens that a couple of days ago, India has done a digital payment, UPI-based, unified payment interface based cash transfer, the LERMS transfer with Singapore. And more such countries probably will join. So India is not just recommending what needs to be done, like the World Bank strengthening, but also recommending digital technology, digital payment system to be strengthened for the benefit of the common people, but also showing the path, how it needs to go forward. As you would know, in India, the digital participation and the digital penetration is almost, in payments space, is almost 87%. So India is leading that area, and therefore, as at the head of the G20 presidency, the Indian Prime Minister has rightly focused on both the need of strengthening multilateral institutions as well as use of more advanced digital payment technology to address concerns of the people and also the concerns that arise from debt vulnerabilities as well as climate change.
Right. Professor Singh, so taking on from what the two other panelists have said, two parts to the question that I would like to ask you. One, of course, is the thrust that the Prime Minister puts on an inclusive agenda. So he urges the G20 members to focus on discussions which are more inclusive in nature. So digital inclusion is one area in which India has shown the way, the manner in which our digital infrastructure has rapidly grown. It has transformed governance. It has transformed people's lives in multiple ways. And that is one thing that we can set as an example to the rest of the world, to other countries in making governance and growth more inclusive. But the other part that we were discussing is how there is need to strengthen multilateral institutions, the fact that trust has been eroded because they've not reformed themselves timely. The question now is, reforms have been long overdue. India has, of course, been calling for reforms. How can reforms happen? And now, as the president of G20, is there anything, how can India lead the way in bringing about these reforms, in bringing about a consensus among the G20 members to ensure that this change that we're talking about for decades actually happens?
First of all, I must say that today is a very auspicious day. Why? Because from India, many of us have been saying that these multilateral institutions need reforms and correct representation. And today, while we are talking, as already mentioned by the previous speaker, the American administration has chosen to appoint an Indo-American as the president of the World Bank. This gentleman brings lots of experience from the emerging countries, as well as has experience of the financial market. That's exactly what many of us have been saying, that governance reforms have to take place in these multilateral institutions, and experts have to be brought in who can serve the purpose. Now, let me share some data with you. According to the UNDP report 2022, 54 developing countries, which account for about 3% of world GDP and also account for half of world poverty, have been identified as severe debt stress. Now, these include 25 sub-Saharan African countries, followed by Latin America and Caribbean countries. Now, let me share another statistics with you, and that will partly explain to you the Prime Minister's thrust in the speech that he made today morning. According to the data, world's poorest countries account for $35 billion as debt service payments to official and private sector creditors. China alone accounts for 40% of the total, one single country. Further, in the 73 countries that are eligible for G20's common framework, Chinese creditors hold 21% of debt, and just wait and see what is the other thing coming. Multilateral lenders account for 41% of the debt. And I worked in the IMF. And I can tell you that the Prime Minister is dot on the spot when he says that these multilateral agencies have not been serving the purpose. We in India know what happened in 1991. And you'll be surprised when in 2022, the act was being repeated in the neighborhood in Sri Lanka. People like me who have lived through the 1991 at the RBI and then worked at the IMF, we realized these institutions have not changed at all. And the countries in the neighborhood are limping, struggling, and there's ransack and riots taking place, and these institutions are not providing support. So the Prime Minister is dot on the spot when he says that, look, these are challenges. The multilateral agencies were made, signed together, brought into existence to help serve as an insurance umbrella when the need arises. But whenever the need arises, they are nowhere to be seen. The reason that they are nowhere to be seen is the governance norms and the quota. And some countries who monopolize the decision making, if it is not in their interest, they never come to the rescue, be it in India in 1991 or be it Sri Lanka in 2022. So that's exactly what the Prime Minister said today. Firstly, there are countries under severe stress after debt. Where is the relief? And the G20 was expected to give the relief under their common framework, and they are going so slow on it. The multilateral agencies, which should have served a far important, faster, quicker umbrella, they did not either. So the Prime Minister is asking the G20, which accounts for 85% of world GDP, and all the big countries and important countries which have a say in the World Bank and the IMF, to put their act together and rise to the occasion. He does give an illustration of the UPI, which I thought was very appropriate, but that's an illustration. If you look at the policies that India pursued during COVID, be it the financial sector, be it the fiscal policy, be it the deficits, be it consolidation of capital expenditure and infrastructure, be it the external sector, name it, India has been the most important, accountable policy maker. And
I
that
think
is the reason
this has clearly been highlighted by the Prime Minister, Dr. Pandey, when he actually tells the G20 finance ministers and the governors of central banks that, of course, to bring back stability, given the current situation that we are in, will be difficult. But you can draw inspiration from the vibrance of the Indian economy. So what exactly, and what is the larger realm of things that he is indicating? Of course, digital transformation is one aspect to it, but largely the kind of things that have helped India remain resilient and which can now, help the other countries actually sail out of this unprecedented challenge also.
So it is not just the digital payments and the related boost to the economy. It is also pursuing prudent fiscal policies and timely interventions to ensure macroeconomic stability. I'll take forward the point my friend Dr. Singh put about the role of multilateral financial. I was about to say that when he switched that to put this number, recently I saw a report from the World Bank group, I say World Bank and IDA, two of the official development assistance as a mix of grant and loans going to all the countries. So till 2006-7, these are Bretton Woods institutions created end of Second World War, and till 2006-7, their accumulated portfolio commitment was about 27 billion, this thing. And till 17, the data that we saw, is going up to 300 billion. So this $300 billion, and as an increment in 10 years, 12 years is maybe $260 billion. It is peanuts compared to the global economy, which is 95 trillion. So the multilateral development institutions have failed to provide development finance. It is less than 1% of 1 year global GDP. And what has prompted, what has been replacement finance has come. For example, China has stepped up financing in many of these countries who should have accessed multilateral loans. They have gone for the Chinese debt. And the Chinese debt, whereas the multilateral debt comes with a 90% official concessional rate, whereas the official development assistance component for the Chinese external debt is about 22%, 23%. And the numbers, they are not put out in public domain, but according to one research study, it was estimated that during 2000 to 2014, Chinese external aid was more than 355 billion, which is far more than the multilateral development assistance, and bulk of it is commercial. So now when from a G20 forum a call is being given, it is a call to multiple stakeholders. It's actually in diplomacy. On the one hand, it is for G20 stakeholders, all the developed economies, that you must step up development financing for climate change, for debt-stressed economies. You must boost. And in terms of crisis, you must evolve debt restructuring programs, debt forgiveness. So when recently Sri Lanka, Zambia, the debt programs were being worked out by IMF, issue has cropped up whether what happens to the Chinese debt, whether the multilateral financial aid becomes a way to repay Chinese debts. And the calls have been made that there should be haircuts. And if the haircuts, who should take haircuts for the debt forgiveness?
And especially, Mr. Bhattacharya, can you expect China to go for these haircuts and, bear these losses?
To be honest, I don't think that China is in any way near finding that solution. But what in the G20 context, I think what is more important is what the Prime Minister is focused on, the Indian model of fiscal and economic governance. And I think that's the message he's trying to convey. And I think that is the message he's trying to tell the whole world about how the Indian model of fiscal governance, fiscal prudence, and the model in which you spend more on creating capital assets, so that through that investment-led growth, it takes care of the economy's vibrancy needs. So I think that's what he is trying to focus on, and he's also worried. What I could make out is the slowing, the slow progress in meeting the Sustainable Development Goal targets. And I think that's a message, is a very, very strong message to the whole global community, that don't ignore the Sustainable Development Goals with 8 billion of population in the whole world. And you need to achieve those individual Sustainable Development Goals. So I think on the whole, the Prime Minister has presented in the Indian model of economic governance. He's highlighted what India has been able to achieve through its digital payments technology. He has underlined the need for strengthening the multilateral development banking system, and he is offering how the Sustainable Development Goals need to be sustained.
Professor Singh, you know what the irony is, that the fact that we are discussing all of these aspects today, how Prime Minister Modi is trying to bring back the attention of the world towards inclusive growth, on a day that marks the first anniversary, 1 year of the Russia-Ukraine war, which has had drastic consequences on the world, and the impact of it is being felt even today. The question is, and in a situation that the world today is in, geopolitics always takes precedence over geoeconomics. So on a day when we are discussing how the thrust should be on bringing back the growth, the confidence, and stability, most importantly, to global economy, we are still, the war is still ongoing and the impact will continue. In fact, it may worsen further in the times to come, given the rhetoric that we are seeing from both sides.
Well, I think the Prime Minister is treated with great respect across the world. The reason is very simple. Our country is not just one country, it's a continent. A continent which is larger than the size of Europe, much larger than America, the type of population that we hold in our country, the languages we have, the diversified political systems that we have across the country, and the political parties that we have. And despite that, we find a common path forward, and the country is leaping at the fastest growth that you have seen. It obviously means that the Prime Minister is telling the world there is a way to build consensus and there is a way to stay focused on the path of growth. That's exactly what's happening in the world. There is fine. There's a war taking place. And in the opening sentence, the Prime Minister clearly spoke about the supply side disruptions. But you know what? There are many in the world who also who also believe that were the sanctions really necessary, and did the sanctions come back to bite America and Europe much worse than was expected. And that is why the supply chain disruptions took place so severely, and that's why the oil prices rose so severely. So the point that I think the Prime Minister is making, that these multilateral institutions, the G20 initiatives, the United Nations, the dialogue needs to be given priority rather than knee-jerk reactions. That is the balanced approach which India is bringing to the G20. Please remember, in the last 1 year, they were not even able to bring one common communique. There was so much of problems because of the Russia-Ukraine war. But the Prime Minister is here saying, there's a table, there's a dialogue. Let's sit together, let's sort out these issues and keep moving forward. At the end of the day, if you want climate and you have all these challenges, are you ready to really spend money on climate and SDG goals? No, they've all taken a backseat. The Prime Minister is bringing it back on the forefront and saying, you cannot neglect these. These are very important. And he's also bringing another thing. Your focus has to be the informal sector. It has to be the UPI, the informal sector, which is bringing in, because common good sits there. So I think
absolutely, and as the Prime Minister says, as his government keeps asserting that this is not the time for war, looking at the consequences over the past 1 year that the world has faced as an aftermath of the war, let's hope that the outcome of what the Prime Minister has said, what India is trying to do in the course of its G20 presidency by focusing on inclusive growth, let's hope that that continues and some positive outcome is before us to see in the times to come, in the months to come. So with that, I'll have to wind up the program. Thank you, Dr. Pandey, Mr. Bhattacharya and Professor Singh for joining us on this edition of Perspective and sharing your thoughts, your views with us and our viewers. And thank you, viewers, to you as well for your time. I'll see you same time tomorrow now. Take good care of yourselves. Keep watching Sansad TV.